Hello everyone. In today's video, I want to share with you what our family has concluded are the 8 worst things about traveling during the pandemic. Okay, if you've been following along with my channel for a while, you know that we have done a fair amount of traveling during the pandemic, and this is everything from one-night getaways close to home to flying across the country and going places far away. We have not left the United States, but I have been paying very close attention to the news and the information that's put out about what is involved in traveling internationally. We also have chosen not to cruise. I'm going to be making a video that's coming up very soon, so make sure you're subscribed to my channel so you don't miss that, about why we have personally for us chosen not to take a cruise, although we very much want to. Okay, so we've come up with 8 things that we think are the worst things about traveling during the pandemic. Traveling during the pandemic is possible, and it is also possible to travel during the pandemic and not contract the virus. If you have done any traveling during the pandemic, I would be really curious to hear your thoughts on this, and put it down in the comments below which one or more of these things that I talk about in this list do you think has been, for you, the worst thing about traveling during the pandemic? Okay, here we go. The number one thing that's the worst thing about traveling in the pandemic is how complicated it is. Okay, there's a lot that goes into planning a trip anytime you go anywhere. But during the pandemic, this has been multiplied a lot. There's so many more things you have to think about and consider and check on and factor in and get ready for when planning a trip during the pandemic that you didn't have to think about before the pandemic. Even if it's a domestic trip and you're just driving there in your car. And this was especially tricky very early on in the pandemic, and I talked about this in one of my early pandemic videos. I'll leave the playlist to my pandemic travel video here and maybe at the end of this video. But at one point I talked about how different states had different requirements. There was one time I remember I was trying to plan a road trip and it was so complicated. I had a US map and I had colored in and marked it up because there were some states we couldn't go into and had to drive all around, and it was really a mess. Now that isn't really so much of an issue anymore. At this point, I don't think that anyone who lives in the United States would not be able to enter a state. There are no states as a whole that are, for example, requiring you to be vaccinated. Some states might still have mask mandates. A lot of cities or municipalities will have some rules. For example, Los Angeles, New Orleans, New York City, San Francisco, I think. Not only do you have to wear masks, but they're also requiring you to be vaccinated and to be able to show proof of vaccination to be able to go in a lot of places. Museums, restaurants, any kind of inside venue. Broadway shows, you have to have proof of vaccination and a negative test. I'm not sure about that. That might have been that at one point. And you have to wear masks, so different cities will have regulation. International travel is especially tricky because every country has different rules. You pretty much should assume if you're going to leave the United States, you're going to have to be vaccinated. You're going to have to make sure your vaccines are up to date. The term fully vaccinated has kind of gone away now because they realized that probably wasn't right. They're still trying to figure out what exactly this whole series of vaccinations entails for different ages and things like that and over what period of time. If you think about it, almost every vaccine we get in life, from the ones you have as an infant, and then you have a series of shots when your kid starts kindergarten, and then they have another series of shots when they start middle school, and then you need some boosters like before you go to college, and then you need some boosters for things and different shots when you get older, like my age and older, shingles, things like that. Almost every vaccine you get in life is a series. I looked it up and I couldn't find a single dose vaccine. Even polio, even if they give it orally, it's multiple doses. So you're always getting a series of vaccines or immunizations. The only ones I'm not sure about are things like when you travel to certain countries. Like when my son went to Morocco, he had to get some certain shots that he didn't have in the normal series that we would get in the United States. And I'm not sure if those were single shots or not. Things like yellow fever and things like that. malaria vaccine. There's even an Ebola vaccine, but I don't know who's eligible to get that one. Vaccination is a big hurdle that you may have to make sure you have done. And some countries want you to be up to date. And what they might mean by that is you can't have had your most recent shot too long ago. And that's kind of still up in the air and changing all the time. Some countries are not allowing people in if your last shot was more than 9 months ago. And then you've got your whole passport situation to worry about. And then you've got quarantining requirements and testing requirements. You have to have this many tests, and tests cost a lot of money. I made a video all about this whole complication thing. So one of the top worst things about traveling during the pandemic is it's really complicated. Second worst thing about traveling during the pandemic is it's risky/scary. Okay? And this goes along with complicated. I mean, a lot of these are quite intertwined, but this one I specifically mean like your stress level and how you feel. There's always a little bit of stress that goes along with travel and making sure you watch this playlist. This is my playlist, Misadventures in Travel. If you haven't watched any of these videos, you have to watch these. These are all of my personal travel stories of times that things have gone very wrong when we've traveled, and what happened, and what lesson you can learn from it. We made the mistakes, so you don't have to, okay? So go watch that playlist when you have time, or even just, peruse through it and look at the titles of the videos, and you will see there's some pretty major stuff on there that you might never have thought about, like, oh my gosh, that happened. There's always going to be some type of stress going along with travel a little bit. The more experienced you are of a traveler, obviously, the less that becomes. But during the pandemic, that stress level is way, way up there. And that's because it's risky/scary, okay? And there's two ways that it's risky and scary. One is you're always worried about, am I going to catch the virus? Am I going to get sick? What's going to happen to me if I catch the virus? Oh no, I don't want to get sick. I don't want to catch the virus. Or, like I talked about in one video I already linked up here, what happens if I test positive while I'm traveling? What happens if I test positive on my cruise? What happens if I test positive while I'm on my trip to Italy? Uh-oh. So there's two things that go along with that, which I talked about at depth in that video. One is your health, and the other thing is your finances. The risk and the potential of catching the virus, or even if you're asymptomatic, testing positive for the virus when you're traveling, can be very risky to your health and to your wallet. So that's something really bad about traveling during the pandemic. Kind of along with that, again now too, the third worst thing about traveling during the pandemic is it's expensive. And part of that goes with that whole, what if you get sick? What if you have to quarantine or isolate or whatever because you tested positive? That's one thing I mean. But the other thing I mean is that everything is just more expensive. Some of this, I don't know if it's related to the pandemic, but some of that is inflation. We've been hearing a lot in the news about rising inflation in the United States. And when you see economic things happen in the United States, you can be pretty confident that those are happening in other parts of the world too. But the prices of things like flights and hotels and food and rental cars, which I've talked about at length in the past, and tickets to attractions and all of that have risen. And so it's expensive to travel during the pandemic. It can also be more expensive to travel during the pandemic because, going back to that number one, it's complicated thing. There might be things you have to do differently in your planning for travel during the pandemic that you wouldn't have to do normally that cost more money. Testing for the virus is expensive. There's a lot of ways that it can be more expensive to travel during the pandemic. Number 4 worst thing about traveling during the pandemic is staffing shortages everywhere, which lead to long waits and long lines. So basically during the pandemic, you have to pack your patience because you're going to be waiting longer for pretty much everything. You're going to be waiting in line longer everywhere you go that you would have to queue for something. Plan on that being a long queue. You're going to have to be waiting longer on the phone. If you're calling your travel agent, you're calling your airline, you're calling Disney, you're calling hotels. Good luck, okay? You might not even be able to get anybody on the phone. And if you do, it's only after you waited on hold for 3 hours. I'm not kidding. Okay, so long waits, long hold times, long waits in line, long waits for everything, and that's due to staffing shortages because of the pandemic. I want to remind you all of something. Is it close? It's 5 million? It's around 5 million people now, I think, or more, have died. Okay? Those people all probably worked somewhere. Not the really elderly, but a lot of the people that have died during the pandemic, they had jobs. And so when we talk about there's a labor shortage, people need to keep in mind part of that is because a whole bunch of workers have died. Okay? And they're not there to work anymore. And I would say that it's a very distinct possibility that a lot of the people that have died worked in the hospitality, tourism, and travel industry, because those would have been frontline workers that were exposed to a lot of people. Think about all the TSA workers that caught the virus and got sick and died, just for one example. So not only have a lot of people died, but a lot of people are still continuing to get sick all the time. That contributes to shortages in the labor market. The hospitality industry and the travel and tourism industry have been hit particularly hard by this. So you should expect that to continue as long as those numbers are up there. Number 5 worst thing about traveling during the pandemic is disruption. What do I mean by this? Okay, basically things don't go as planned. And this happens all the time in a whole bunch of ways. A friend of mine just took her family to Washington, D.C. in December, and one of the museums that they were really excited to go to and wanted to go to because of the Omicron surge closed suddenly on the day they were planning to go there. That's a disruption. Just recently, I saw, you see these all the time, there was a cruise on Norwegian. I can't remember which Norwegian ship it was. They had just started the cruise, and they canceled the cruise during the cruise. And they turned around and went back, and everybody got off, and your cruise is canceled. Everybody got their money back, but no cruise, okay? Lots of disruptions in the cruise industry. The thousands and thousands and thousands of canceled flights we saw over the holidays, over Christmas and over New Year's, and continuing even until at least the day I'm making this video, that's a disruption. These are the kinds of things I mean. When things don't go according to plan because things get disrupted because of the pandemic. And they're getting disrupted because of people getting sick. They're getting disrupted because of restrictions and rules. They're getting disrupted because of, governments shutting things down or businesses shutting things down or a whole host of reasons. But disruptions is a major factor when you're traveling during the pandemic. And no matter how much you try to avoid it, we had a disruption on our trip in August, and that wasn't related to the pandemic. There was a hurricane. Our trip got cut short. All the things we were going to go to were closed because of the hurricane. And so we ended up coming home 2 days early because nothing we were going to go to was open. And so that's a disruption. But during the pandemic, travel is especially prone to disruptions. And that's one of the worst things about traveling during the pandemic. You can't plan with any kind of confidence that everything's going to go the way you expect it to. You really can't. The only thing I think you really can expect is that something's going to get disrupted. Okay, number 6, and this is one that really bothers us personally, and that's dining. Okay, we take the pandemic very, very seriously. And if you've watched my videos for a while, you know that's true. I personally do not know anyone who takes the pandemic as seriously as me and Megan and Ben do. Not even my son Andrew, not even my parents. Maybe my mom. But even my mom a couple times has not quite seemed to understand how seriously I take it. I'm sure there are other people who take it as seriously as we do, but I don't personally know them. There's nobody around me where I live that's taking it as seriously as I am that I know of, okay? I'm sure those people exist, but the one thing I have noticed during the pandemic is the people who don't take it seriously are the loud ones. They're the ones who are very vocal. They're the ones who are putting up a stink. They're the ones who are getting into fights and attacking flight attendants. And freaking out and yelling at people. Many people I know are not doing that. But you have to admit, it's not those of us who are taking it seriously that are the loud ones. It's the people who don't want to follow the rules and don't want to do the things necessary to make this pandemic end that are being loud and obnoxious. Okay, so if there's other people like me who take it as seriously as I do and who are as upset as I am that this is dragging out this long because people aren't taking it seriously, they're quiet. And so I'm not aware of them. But this comes into play with dining in that we don't feel comfortable eating inside restaurants. Eating inside restaurants, which it seems like everybody else is perfectly fine doing, and we wonder why the virus continues to spread, is one of the most dangerous, riskiest activities you can do. If you're eating inside, I don't know what to tell you. I wouldn't do it. It's not a good idea. I mean, maybe there were a couple points where it got low enough where it was okay, but for the most part, I really don't think anybody should be eating inside restaurants. Now, yes, I do feel very bad for the restaurants because they need the business, but most restaurants have done a good job of transitioning to takeout and delivery and things like that. So for us, when we travel, and this is a big bummer, we drive through or we go and pick it up or we have it delivered and we eat in one of three places. Outside, if we can eat outside, we will eat outside. In our car, which is not fun, or in our hotel room. Those are the three places that we'll eat. And it's not great. I don't like it. I don't like eating outside. There's bugs and birds and stuff. And it's hot or it's raining or it's cold or whatever. But we have limited ourselves with very few exceptions. I mean, I can count on one hand, and it's probably more like this, how many times we've eaten inside a restaurant during the pandemic. And either the restaurant was completely empty, except for the people who worked there who were masked, or it was in June when we traveled and it was a very low point for cases and transmission during the pandemic. But that is a real bummer. I really do miss dining out. Are there other people like us who won't eat inside restaurants still? I don't know why you think it's better now. I mean, the virus is more transmission. There's more cases now than there's ever been in the entire pandemic. So it's definitely not safer now than it was before. And the Omicron variant is like at least triple as contagious as the Delta variant was. So dining is a big bummer and one of the worst things about traveling during the pandemic, because dining is an integral part, and eating at restaurants and being able to try foods in different regions and try new restaurants and things. That's one of my favorite things about traveling. Not having to cook is one of my favorite things about traveling because I hate cooking. And so having that be messed up because of the pandemic, I really don't like this one. Okay, number 7, I'm going to put it on here because I know this is a lot of people's thing that they don't like at all, and that's wearing masks. Okay, I've talked a lot in the past that we don't mind wearing masks. We have no problem with it. We're very happy to put on our masks, and we wear our masks more than almost everyone. So we wear our masks all the time. My kids don't put up any fuss wearing masks. I have the utmost respect for people, other vloggers and things that I see in their videos. They just wear their mask automatically. They don't have any problem with it. They never complain. I don't understand. If you complain about wearing a mask, I don't understand. Wear your mask, okay? Especially if it's a rule. If the business is asking you to wear the mask, just wear the dang mask. And do you want to kill people? I don't understand it. Like, why would you not wear it? I don't understand it. If you're going on a cruise and the masks are required on the cruise, wear the mask or don't take the cruise. Just follow the rules. And if you're not willing to do that, then don't go. That's how I feel. I feel very strongly about that. If you are not willing to follow the rules, it's not up to you, okay? There's lots of things in life where we have to follow the rules. We have to do it as they say. If you want to get unemployment, you got to do these things. If you want to get a job, you have to do these things. You know, it's no different than like if you get hired at some place and they require a drug test. You do it or you don't get the job. There's lots of things in life like that. And I feel like masking is one of those. You do it or you don't get to do the thing. It's as simple as that. However, I will say it can start to get uncomfortable and annoying when you have to wear a mask all the time. You will. I mean, look at poor healthcare workers that wear them all the time, not even during the pandemic. They get lines on their face. You get hot and you get sweaty sometimes underneath it, especially if it's hot in the summertime. There is some discomfort involved. Maybe you start to have things behind your ears or whatever. Of course, that's true. And I understand that, but I don't think it's an excuse for not wearing it. So having to wear masks is a pain. It's a pain for your pictures, If you wanted to take a nice group picture inside in a place where masks are required, you can't. You're all going to have your masks on. I do think it's kind of a cool snapshot of history. If we look back to the 1918-1919 Spanish flu pandemic, there's lots and lots of historical pictures from that of people with masks on. And I guess I find that interesting. I think it's kind of cool to be able to capture what it was like at the time, and that's going to be the same for us now, for people looking back at this time in the future. But I totally acknowledge that having to wear masks is not something we would prefer to do when we're traveling, and so I included that on the list as one of the worst things about traveling during the pandemic. Okay, and then number 8, the final worst thing about traveling during the pandemic, and Megan added this one: lower quality experiences. And I'm like, elaborate on that. What do you mean? And she's totally right. I'll give you a couple of examples. One is when we went to the Minnesota Zoo, which we're members of, well, a couple times I can think of actually, but the one she was specifically referring to was when we went for the first time in the summer of 2020 after they first reopened after being closed. I made a video about it. Watch it up here. It was weird. They're trying to protect the animals. They don't want the animals to get the virus because animals get the virus too, and a lot of animals have died, sadly. Some rare endangered animals have died of the virus, which is horrible. Okay, it's horrible that people die of it too, but that's really sad, when there's only 50 of these animals left and 5 of them die of the virus. But it was one way. You could only go on this certain path. There was lots of plastic and plexiglass. Some animals weren't on exhibit at all. You were going backwards through the zoo, opposite of the way you normally did. Now, they've gotten rid of all of that since then. We've been to the zoo since then, and it's basically back to normal to the most part, except for protections that they have on certain specifically endangered animals or vulnerable animals. But she's right. That was a lower quality experience because it wasn't how we were used to it, and it was strange, and it didn't work very well, honestly. Another lower quality experience that Megan brought up that I totally agree with is we would really like to go on another Disney cruise. But Disney cruises right now are not how they normally are. And the kids have said, I don't want to go on one right now. And this is separate from what I'm going to talk about in an upcoming video with why we're not cruising, but specifically to Disney, but even like some other cruise lines and things, because of crew that do the live entertainment and things, getting the virus and having to isolate and things like that, there's been some cruises where they've had to cancel all the entertainment. So you don't have any shows at night or anything. Well, that stinks. That's part of what you pay for when you go on a cruise. And also, like, going back to the masking thing. Some people really don't like that, and they feel like having to wear the mask on the cruise on their vacation, it reminds them too much of the reality of the pandemic. It's not very vacation-y, and makes it a lower quality experience. So I think you should understand what I mean. During the pandemic, the experiences that we would normally have, the quality of the experience is lowered because of the pandemic. So it's just not the same, and it's not as nice. It's not what you're hoping for in the experience. And this is true for a lot of things. Everything from dining out, like I mentioned, to going to a museum, to, all sorts of things. Okay, so that is what we came up with for the 8 worst things about traveling during the pandemic. Do you agree with these? Which one or more of these do you really feel strongly about really does make travel worse during the pandemic and that you wish could go away? Leave those in the comments below. Thanks for taking the time to watch this today. I hope you're all doing well. Have a great day and safe travels.